Welcome to Punctuation for Court Reporters, video number 66, using quotation marks with yes and no. I'm Ken Wick. Let's get started. So when do you use quotation marks with yes and no? The assumption is you're quoting somebody. So the fundamental use of quotation marks is you use quotation marks for direct quotation. So when do you use quotation marks with yes and no? So which one is correct? Which response is correct after this question? What was that? What was your answer? Is it my answer was no? Just so lowercase, no quotation marks. Is it my answer was no? Is it lowercase in quotation marks? Or is it my answer was no, uppercase in quotation marks? Which one of those is correct? So we will find out. But before we move on to the references, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the videos. And if you like the video, please hit like. And check out the links to the videos and books in the description. So let's cover LMEG. So this is LMEG Rule 96. So once again, we're talking about, this is in the direct quote. So this in LMEG, this section is on quotation marks, and it's talking about putting direct quotations, or when you have a direct quotation, put them in quotation marks. Then it goes on to say what to quote and not to quote is sometimes very subtle. Because the question could be, is it a direct quotation, right? So this is what that means. And then it goes on to say, for very short responses, yes, no, fine, sure, okay, it is easier, and just as acceptable to omit the quotation marks. So what's saying is that, yes, these can be a direct quotation, but it's just easier and acceptable to omit the question mark or quotation marks. And then there is no specific information found on capitalization, meaning beyond the normal capitalization rules, there is nothing in this rule that discussed the capitalization of yes and no. So, generally in capitalization, since yes and no may represent a fragment, meaning not a complete sentence, in court reporting we do capitalize fragments or things that represent a complete sentence. But so beyond that rule, there is no specific information found in the LMEG. So these are verbatim book examples. So straight, these are exact quote or exact verbatim quotes from the examples. Question, what did you say? Answer, she said no. In this case, the LMEG is saying or it's giving the example of capitalize with quotation marks. Another example is, what was your answer? Answer, my answer was no. In this case, the LMEG did not put this, or it's lowercase, no quotes, because it's obeying this rule, or this portion of the rule right here that's saying that even though this is it's a very short response, as in no, and you are allowed, or is acceptable, to not put the quotation marks. So let's move on to the BGGP. So these are rules found in Chapter 28, Rules 2 and 3. I forget what the exact title of that chapter is. It says no quotation marks when yes or no are used generically. So I interpret this to mean it's not being used as a quotation, which would make a lot of sense. This says use quotation marks when it is used in a specific sense as a possible answer. And then it gives also, once again, no specific capitalization information, just on yes and no. I'm not talking about like the fragment. If we go back to the fragment rule, you do capitalize a fragment. So examples, No need to explain, just give a yes or no. So here, this person is not quoting anybody. It's being used in a generic sense. So no quotation marks. And also the BGGP did not capitalize, because these don't really represent a complete sentence. And then it gives the next example. It gives us, you need to answer yes or no. So here, as the possible or a specific sense as a possible answer, which this is, then it puts them in quotation marks. Since it has no information about capitalization, I'm going to assume, since BGGP capitalizes fragments, that it's the reason it's capitalized is because it's the yes and no. So if you're instructing someone to say yes or no, that would be the answer. It's a fragment, it would be capitalized, but it doesn't say it specifically. I'm just assuming that's the reason it's capitalized. Oops. Okay. Now let's move on to the Greg's Reference Manual, section 233. It says no quotes unless you want to emphasize it as the exact word spoken. So just a single yes or no. No, don't quote it unless you want to emphasize it. And it says the quotes imply the person said this much and no more. So it's not that they only said that. So there's some interpretation here. It's trying to say that if you put it in quotes, it's implying that there is nothing else said. It doesn't have to be true. It's just, this is what the Greg's Reference Manual says. It says do not capitalize unless it represents a complete sentence. This is earlier, probably like Rule 101 in the Greg's Reference Manual. It says to capitalize fragments. So it's just restating that. So capitalize it if it represents a complete sentence. And then some examples. Please answer the questions yes or no. So this is here. This is the exact opposite of the BGGP. So, but here, it's obviously saying that it's not capitalizing it because it doesn't want to possibly, or it doesn't want, it's not being emphasized. And of course, this would it wouldn't be capitalized because it's not representing a complete sentence. This and it's not implying. So going back to the quotes, is not implying that only this much would be said. Don't say no until you hear the sales pitch. This is obviously, this no here is being used in a generic sense, not trying to quote anybody. And then I asked Jimmy if he ate the cookie. No was his immediate answer. Here we're quoting it. So this is the exact word spoken. We want to emphasize that that was the word spoken, and a no does represent, it's a fragment, but it represents a complete sentence. So it's capitalizing it. So let's just do a rundown of the references. As you see, they all are different, but let's go back to the fundamental concept of you use quotation marks with a direct quotation. That is the basic fundamental concept. And that is in LMEG 94 and Greg's Reference Manual 227. And just a summary of the references, the LMEG says, use quotes but omission acceptable for very short answers. And then the BGGP basically is use quotes. So you can say that if you're quoting somebody. So this is going back to the fundamental concept. It's quote it. If it's a quote, quote it or put it in quotes. But here the LMEG says it's okay to omit. But BGGP would quote it. And also, I should have probably said here is that it also would put quotation marks with a possible answer. And the Greg's Reference Manual is no quotes unless emphasis is desired. Looks like I forgot the word is. And that's the basic summary of all those. And you can see that basically, it was maybe a trick question at the beginning. We're going to get the examples, but they all handle this slightly differently. So, you know, if you're using a specific manual, then you need to follow that manual. And I recommend, it's very similar to the BGGP. Use a quotation marks if it's a direct quotation. That's the fundamental concept. And also, capitalize yes and no if it represents a complete sentence. That's the basic concept of capitalizing a fragment. So I'm just going to stick with what I call the fundamental concepts and not, it's okay to omit it if it's very short or, any emphasis is needed or something. To me, I just follow the fundamental concepts of using quotation marks with direct quotations and capitalizing it if it represents a complete sentence. So let's go over some two examples. How would you do? This is just a generic, or is yes and no capitalized in quotes? What is it? You need to answer yes or no. What is the answer there? Well, the LMEG and the Greg's reference manual would leave this lowercase with no quotes, because you're not really quoting anybody, as I see it. And if it was a quote, LMEG would say it's short, and it's a short answer. And the Griggs reference manual is saying don't use quotes unless it's used for emphasis. So, and anyways, these are being used in a general sense. So this seems to be sort of clear. It's a generic sense. But this is the one exception with the BGGP. It's saying if it's a what was the exact words? But basically, it's pointing to a possible answer, a specific possible answer. So it would capitalize yes and no. So just trying to point out sort of trick question. Two would do it this way, the other one would do it this way. And what about this next example? This is from the example or the question from the very opening slide. Was that your answer? And the response, possible responses were in the first slide, but my answer was no. This is how LMEG would write it, because it says a short, very short answer. You can. It's not going to put the quotes. The BGGP would capitalize and put it in quotes. So I can say the exact opposite from the LMEG. And the Griggs reference manual would mirror the LMEG. If you don't know, the LMEG is based upon the Griggs reference manual, so it should always be no shocker that the LMEG and the Griggs reference manual line up on a lot of things. So the answer was no. But the Griggs reference manual does say if you do want to emphasize it, you can put it in quotes, and if it represents a complete sentence, then you capitalize it. So it could go either way with Griggs reference manual, depending on how you're interpreting this. So the Griggs reference manual allows both, depending on what you want to do. So, and then my recommended, just to throw it in, I would actually say my answer was no, because it's a quote. Remember the fundamental concepts. It's direct quote, so I use quotes, and no represents a complete statement, so I would capitalize it. That's how I would do it. So that's all. I'm going to thank you for watching.